Commander Zthar stepped off the transport ship and felt the cold metal of forward base Delta 7 beneath his feet. His forearms hung at his sides as he looked around the busy station. Ships of different alien races came and went through the docking bays. The war against the Devourers had been going on for 20 years now, and Zthar had fought in most of those battles. The Calarian officer was tired. His blue-gray skin showed scars from plasma burns and bioacid attacks. His large black eyes had seen too much death. He had requested this assignment to the monitoring station because he needed a break from the front lines. At least, that's what he told himself. A short figure in a strange uniform walked up to him. The being had only 2 arms and 2 legs, and its skin was a pale pink color. It smiled, showing white teeth, and extended one hand toward Zthar. "Commander Zthar, I presume," the being said in perfect galactic standard. "I'm Captain Jake Morris, Human Liaison Officer. Welcome to Delta 7. Zthar looked at the extended hand for a moment before reaching out with one of his own arms to touch it briefly. He had heard about this human greeting ritual. The human's grip was firm and warm. "Captain Morris," Zthar replied. "I have been assigned to observe operations in the human sector." Jake Morris nodded and gestured for Zthar to follow him through the station's corridors. The walls were covered with displays showing battle maps and fleet positions. Red dots marked Devourer forces, while blue dots showed coalition ships. "You picked an interesting time to join us," Morris said as they walked. "My people just got assigned to the Nightmare Sector 3 days ago." Zthar stopped walking. The Nightmare Sector was where ships went to die. 3 full coalition fleets had been destroyed there in the past year. The Devourers had turned it into a killing ground, filled with their worst bioweapons. "Your people were sent there?" Zthar asked. Morris grinned wider. "Yep. High Command figured we could buy some time while the real fleets regroup. Pretty standard for the new guys, right?" The way Morris talked about his species being sent to die disturbed Zthar. The humans seemed almost excited about it. They walked into a briefing room where other coalition officers were gathered around a large table. General Krixtal of the Vorthon Republic looked up as they entered. His insect-like face showed no emotion, but Zthar could tell he was annoyed. Our Calarian observer has arrived," Krixtal clicked in his mechanical voice. "Perhaps you can help us understand why High Command wants us to waste time monitoring a species that will be extinct by week's end." Admiral Fern of the Zolani Collective nodded her scaled head in agreement. "The humans have been given outdated ships and minimal supplies. They lack the biological adaptations needed to survive Devourer bioweapons. It is simple mathematics." Morris sat down at the table and pulled up a holographic display. It showed the current positions of human forces in the Nightmare Sector. Zthar was surprised to see that the blue dots representing human ships were not retreating. They were advancing deeper into Devourer territory. "Our boys have been busy," Morris said cheerfully. "Took out 3 Devourer patrol groups yesterday. Lost some good people, but we gave better than we got." Krixtal's mandibles clicked in what Zthar recognized as disbelief. "Define lost some good people in numerical terms." Morris looked at his datapad. 43 ships destroyed, 812 casualties. But we took down 6 Devourer biocruisers and maybe 15 smaller ships. The room went quiet. Those numbers were impossible. Human ships were smaller and less advanced than Devourer vessels. The mathematics didn't work. "How?" Admiral Fern asked. Morris shrugged. "Humans are stubborn. When we decided to join this war, we decided to win it. Our boys don't know how to quit." Over the next hour, Morris showed them battle reports and casualty lists. The numbers told a story that made no sense to any military doctrine Zthar knew. Humans were winning battles they should lose, but at costs that would break any rational species. One report showed a human destroyer ramming a Devourer bioship 3 times its size. The human ship was destroyed, but so was the enemy vessel. Another showed human marines boarding a Devourer carrier and fighting hand-to-hand with creatures designed to eat sentient beings alive. "This is not warfare," Krixtal said finally. "This is mass suicide with extra steps." Morris laughed. The sound was disturbing to Zthar's ears. "Maybe, but it's working, isn't it?" After the briefing, Zthar walked with Morris to the observation deck. Through the transparent aluminum windows they could see the distant glow of battles in the nightmare sector. "Captain Morris," Zthar said carefully, "do your people understand what they are fighting?" Morris looked out at the distant lights. "Sure. Big scary bugs that want to eat everyone in the galaxy, pretty straightforward." "The Devourers are not simply aggressive," Zthar explained. "They are a biological weapon created by an extinct species. They were designed to consume all life. They feel no fear, no pain, no mercy. They cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. They exist only to kill and consume." Morris nodded. "Sounds familiar." Something in the human's tone made Zthar look at him more closely. Morris's eyes had a hardness that reminded Zthar of veteran soldiers he had known. But Morris was young, barely past what humans called adulthood. "Your species has faced such enemies before?" Zthar asked. "Not exactly," Morris said. "But humans have been fighting wars for as long as we've existed. We've gotten pretty good at killing things that need killing." That night, Zthar reviewed the human battle reports in his quarters. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. Humans fought in ways that violated every principle of military science. They wasted resources on emotional gestures. They refused to retreat from hopeless positions. They treated their own lives as expendable. But they were winning. One report caught his attention. A human outpost had been surrounded by Devourer forces for 6 hours. Standard doctrine would have been to call for evacuation or orbital bombardment. Instead, the humans had requested more ammunition. The request had been denied due to Devourer air superiority. The humans had responded by fashioning explosive devices from their ship's power cores and detonating them in the middle of Devourer formations. 17 humans had died in the explosions, but they had taken nearly 300 Devourers with them. The final line of the report read, Human Commander Rodriguez's last transmission was, quote, "Tell my mom I kept my promise," end quote. Nature of promise unknown. Zthar set down the data pad and looked out his small window at the stars. In all his years of warfare, he had seen species fight for survival, for territory, for resources. He had never seen a species fight the way humans did. Tomorrow he would request permission to visit the human battlefront. He needed to see for himself what these creatures were doing in the nightmare sector. Something told him that what he found there would change everything. He thought he knew about war. As he prepared for sleep, Zthar couldn't shake the feeling that the Coalition had made a terrible mistake. They had sent humanity to fight monsters, expecting them to die quickly and quietly. Instead, they had unleashed something that might be more dangerous than the monsters themselves. 3 days passed before Zthar received the transmission that would change everything. He was reviewing supply reports in his quarters when his communication device began making sounds he had never heard before. The signal was coming from the human battlefront, but the audio was wrong. Mixed with standard military communications, Zthar could hear what sounded like singing, and screaming, and laughter, all at the same time. "This is Human Fleet Command to all Coalition observers," came a voice through the static. "We've had a good day out here, really good. If anyone wants to see what we've been up to, now would be the time." The transmission cut off, leaving Zthar staring at his communication device. He had heard celebration messages before, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. Against his better judgment and direct orders from General Krickstahl, Zthar made his way to the ship bay. He found Lieutenant Lisa Grant, a young human communications specialist, preparing a small reconnaissance ship. "You heard it too?" she asked when she saw him. Zthar nodded. "Your people sound different than they did 3 days ago." Lisa looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her face. "War changes people fast, especially humans. You want to come see what my boys have been doing out there?" "That would violate my orders," Zthar said. Lisa smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Orders are for people who plan to survive long enough to get in trouble for breaking them." An hour later, their small ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the nightmare sector. What Zthar saw made him question his understanding of physics. The space around the human fleet was filled with debris, but not human debris. The twisted remains of Devourer bioships floated in massive clouds. Some were still twitching, their biological components dying slowly in the vacuum of space. The human fleet itself looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Ships held together with metal patches and emergency sealant drifted in loose formation. Several were missing entire sections. One destroyer had a massive hole through its center but was still operational. "How are those ships still fighting?" Zthar asked. Lisa checked her instruments. "Humans are good at making broken things work. We've had a lot of practice." They received docking permission from the human flagship, a heavy cruiser called the UES Defiance. As their ship approached, Zthar could see that the Defiance's hull was covered in scorch marks and what looked like bite marks from Devourer bioweapons. The docking bay was chaos. Human crew members ran back and forth, carrying ammunition, medical supplies, and body bags. Everyone was moving too fast, talking too loud, and working too hard. Captain Steve Murphy met them at the airlock. His uniform was stained with blood, oil, and something green that Zthar didn't want to identify. Murphy's eyes were bloodshot and his hands shook slightly, but he was grinning. "Commander Zthar, right?" Murphy said, shaking his hand vigorously. "Great timing. We just finished our third major engagement, lost the Henderson and the Carlisle, but we took down one of their big boys. Thing was the size of a space station." Zthar looked around the docking bay. Half the crew looked like they should be in medical facilities. Many had bandages, burns, or mechanical prosthetics. None of them seemed to care. "Captain Murphy, how long have your forces been in continuous combat?" Zthar asked. Murphy thought for a moment. "What day is it? Honestly, we've been fighting for about 72 hours straight. Maybe more. Time gets weird out here." 72. Hours of continuous combat would drive most species insane. Zthar had never heard of forces maintaining effectiveness for more than 12 hours without rest. "Your crew needs medical attention and sleep," Zthar said. Murphy laughed. "Yeah, probably. But the bugs don't sleep, so neither do we. Come on, let me show you around." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Zthar was amazed by what he saw. Human crew members were singing while they worked. Others were telling jokes while repairing critical systems. One group was playing cards next to a massive hole in the ship's hull, apparently unconcerned that only an emergency force field stood between them and the vacuum of space. In the medical bay, Dr. Amy Foster was treating a steady stream of wounded humans. She worked with calm efficiency, but Zthar noticed that she was operating with one arm in a sling. "Dr. Foster," Zthar said, "you appear to be injured yourself." She looked up from the soldier she was treating. "Took some shrapnel. Yesterday, no big deal. We've lost about 30% of our people in the last 3 days, so everyone who can work is working." She said this the same way she might comment on the weather. Zthar realized that 30% casualties would be considered a devastating defeat by any military he knew. The humans seemed to consider it a normal day at work. "Doctor, how do your people maintain morale with such losses?" Zthar asked. Amy smiled and returned to her patient. "Morale? We're winning, aren't we? Every ship we destroy is one less ship threatening Earth. Simple math." But it wasn't simple math. Zthar had reviewed the tactical data. The humans were outnumbered 10 to 1. Their ships were inferior. Their weapons were outdated. By every logical calculation, they should have been wiped out in the first engagement. Captain Murphy led him to the bridge, where Zthar saw something that would stay with him forever. The main screen showed footage from their most recent battle. A human destroyer, heavily damaged and losing atmosphere, was ramming a Devourer biocruiser head-on. "That's the Martinez," Murphy said proudly. Captain Rodriguez knew his ship was finished, so he decided to take one of theirs with him. Beautiful work. On the screen, Zthar watched the two ships collide in a massive explosion. Both were destroyed instantly, along with everyone aboard. "You celebrate the death of your own people?" Zthar asked. Murphy's expression became serious, for the first time. "We don't celebrate their death, Commander. We celebrate what they accomplished with their death. Rodriguez saved maybe 1,000 lives by taking out that cruiser. He knew it and he made the choice. That's what humans do. In the ship's mess hall, Zthar met Private Danny Rodriguez, the brother of the captain who had died ramming the Devourer ship. Danny was eating with his left hand because his right arm was missing from the elbow down. The stump was wrapped in bandages that were already soaked with blood. "Private Rodriguez," Zthar said carefully, "you should be in medical care." Danny looked up and grinned. "Doc Foster says I can keep the arm if I want, but the prosthetic works better for operating weapon systems. Besides, my brother always said I was too right-handed anyway." The casual way Danny talked about losing a limb disturbed Zthar more than anything else he had seen. When he suggested that Danny should be evacuated to a medical facility, the young human laughed. "Evacuated? We're just getting warmed up out here. The bugs think they can scare us with their bioweapons and their size advantage. They don't understand humans very well." "What don't they understand?" Zthar asked. Danny's expression became thoughtful. "They think war is about survival. For humans, war is about making sure the right side wins. Those are two very different things." That night, Zthar remained aboard the Defiance as the human fleet prepared for another engagement. He watched from the bridge as Captain Murphy gave orders to his crew. The humans moved with manic energy, preparing weapons and checking systems, while singing songs that seemed to be about death and glory. When the Devourer fleet appeared on their sensors, the human crew actually cheered. Zthar had seen many species react to overwhelming enemy forces. He had never seen anyone react with joy. "All ships, this is Murphy," the captain announced over the communication system. "Looks like we've got about 50 of the ugly bastards incoming. Remember, we don't have to kill all of them. We just have to make sure they regret meeting us." The battle that followed was unlike anything in Zthar's experience. Humans fought with a combination of tactical skill and absolute recklessness that defied explanation. They used their ships as weapons, their bodies as shields, and their lives as currency to buy victory. When it was over, 12 human ships had been destroyed, but 27 Devourer vessels were floating dead in space. The mathematics still didn't make sense, but the results were undeniable. As Zthar prepared to return to Forward Base Delta 7, Captain Murphy shook his hand one final time. "Thanks for visiting, Commander," Murphy said. "Hope we didn't scare you too much." Zthar looked at the young human captain, whose species had just accomplished the impossible while treating it as routine. "Captain Murphy," Zthar said quietly, "I believe I am beginning to understand why the Devourers should be afraid." Zthar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of returning to Forward Base Delta 7, he requested permission to remain embedded with human forces. General Krixtal was not pleased, but approved the assignment, after Zthar explained that someone needed to document human tactics for coalition records. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. Zthar needed to understand what he was witnessing. In 30 years of warfare, he had never seen anything like human military doctrine. It violated every principle he had learned about combat, logistics, and basic survival. Over the following weeks, Zthar watched humans fight in ways that should have been impossible. They advanced when they should retreat. They attacked when they should defend. They spent lives like currency, always buying something more valuable than what they fed him. The first revelation came during what humans called a boarding action. Sergeant Kate Johnson led a team of 12 Marines onto a Devourer bioship, a living vessel the size of a small city. The ship's interior was designed to kill intruders through psychological terror as much as physical weapons. Zthar watched through helmet cameras as Kate's team moved through corridors that pulsed like blood vessels. The walls secreted acid that could dissolve most metals. The air was filled with spores that caused hallucinations and respiratory failure in most species. Creatures that looked like walking nightmares hunted them through the darkness. The Marines were laughing. "Johnson, you seeing these ugly things?" came a voice over the radio. That was Corporal Bill Hayes, one of Kate's veterans. "Yeah, they're pretty gross," Kate replied, firing her weapon at something with too many teeth. "Reminds me of my ex-husband." The team continued deeper into the ship, making jokes about the horrors around them. When Private Lucy Torres lost her helmet to a creature's claws, she kept fighting while breathing the toxic air. When Corporal Hayes ran out of ammunition, He started using a broken piece of the ship's wall as a club. "Sergeant Johnson," Zthar said over the communication channel, "your team needs to retreat. The environmental hazards alone should be fatal." Kate's response came between bursts of weapons fire. "Commander, we've got a job to do here. These charges aren't going to plant themselves." The mission was simple in concept, but insane in execution. Kate's team was placing explosive charges throughout the bioship's vital organs. The plan was to destroy the vessel from inside, but doing so would kill everyone on the boarding team. "Sergeant, there is no extraction plan for your team," Zthar pointed out. "I know," Kate said cheerfully. "That's what makes it interesting." Zthar watched 12 humans work their way through a living nightmare, placing charges that would kill them along with their target. They did this while singing songs, telling stories about home and making plans they would never live to complete. When the charges detonated, the bioship died in convulsions that could be seen from space. Kate Johnson and her team died with it. Their final transmission was Kate singing something called "My Country Ties of Thee," while the ship's death throes shook her to pieces. The tactical result was significant. The bioship had been coordinating devourer forces across 3 star systems. Its destruction threw enemy operations into chaos for weeks. But Zthar couldn't understand why 12 people had volunteered to die for it. "Because someone had to," explained Colonel Frank Davis when Zthar asked. Davis was the human ground forces commander, a man whose hair had gone white during just 2 months of fighting devourers. They were standing in what had been a human forward outpost. Now it was a crater surrounded by the remains of thousands of devourer creatures. Lieutenant Paul Carter and 43 soldiers had held this position against a full devourer assault for 8 hours. "Lieutenant Carter's final message is interesting," Davis said, handing Zthar a datapad. He knew they were all going to die. He knew reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time. But he also knew that every devourer his people killed here was one less devourer threatening the next outpost. Zthar read the message. It was brief and matter-of-fact. "Tell them we held the line. Tell them it cost the bugs more than they wanted to pay. Tell my mom I kept my promise." Around the crater, human soldiers were collecting dog tags from their dead comrades. Many were crying, but they continued working. The dead would be honored, but the war would continue. "Colonel Davis," Zthar said carefully, "your species measures success differently than others." Davis nodded. "Most species fight to win. Humans fight to make sure the other guy loses. Sometimes those are the same thing, sometimes they're not." The distinction seemed meaningless until Zthar witnessed what humans called the last stand. A small human outpost had been surrounded by devourer forces for 6 days. The humans had no food, no water, and were almost out of ammunition. Standard military doctrine called for surrender or negotiation. Instead, the humans did something that defied rational explanation. They rigged their entire base to explode and invited the devourer forces to come take it. Major Helen Brooks commanded the outpost. She was 26 years old and had been fighting for 3 months. When Zthar spoke to her via radio before the final battle, she sounded tired but determined. "Major Brooks, your position is hopeless," Zthar told her. "Surrender may be possible." Helen laughed. "Commander, you don't understand devourers very well. They don't take prisoners, they take meals. Besides, we've got one more card to play." "What card is that?" "We're going to make them pay retail for this piece of dirt." The final battle lasted 2 hours. Zthar watched through orbital surveillance as 10,000 devourer creatures swarmed the human outpost. The 47 humans inside fought with everything they had, then fought with improvised weapons, then fought with their bare hands. When the devourers finally breached the main bunker, Helen Brooks triggered the explosives. The blast could be seen from orbit. It killed every human in the outpost and nearly 8,000 devourer creatures. The tactical result was minimal. The outpost had no strategic value. Its loss didn't change the overall military situation. But something about the battle changed how devourer forces approached human positions. They became more cautious, more hesitant. "They're learning to be afraid," Captain Murphy explained to Zthar later. "Devourers are programmed to consume and destroy, but they're also programmed to survive so they can keep consuming and destroying. When every meal costs them more than they gain, they start thinking twice. Zthar began to understand that humans didn't measure victory by territory gained or casualties avoided. They measured victory by the price they made their enemies pay for everything. This philosophy extended to every aspect of human warfare. When supply lines were cut, humans made their own ammunition from scrap metal. When ships were damaged beyond repair, humans turned them into weapons. When faced with impossible odds, humans found ways to make the impossible cost more than their enemies wanted to spend. The most disturbing example came when Zthar witnessed human reinforcements arriving. At a battle already lost, 3 human destroyers found themselves facing a devourer fleet that had just destroyed a human convoy. The logical response would be to retreat and report the convoy's fate. Instead, the 3 destroyers attacked. Commander Sarah Kim led the assault, knowing her ships were outgunned and outnumbered. She also knew the convoy had been carrying medical supplies to human colonies threatened by devourer forces. "All ships, this is Kim," she announced over the radio. "Those supplies were going to save lives. These bugs just killed a lot of people who didn't deserve to die. Let's send them a bill." The 3 destroyers fought like creatures possessed. They used ramming attacks, suicide runs, and tactics that would have been considered war crimes if used against other humans. When it was over, all 3 human ships were destroyed, but so was the entire devourer fleet that had attacked the convoy. Commander Kim's people didn't save the medical supplies, Colonel Davis explained to Zthar afterward, but they made sure the devourers paid the full price for destroying them. Next time the bugs see a human convoy, they'll remember what it cost them last time. Zthar was beginning to realize that humans had weaponized their own willingness to die. Every battle became a transaction where humans offered their lives in exchange for enemy casualties. The exchange rate always favored the humans, because they were willing to pay prices no rational species would consider. But the cost was becoming visible in the human forces themselves. Soldiers who had been joking and singing weeks earlier now moved with grim determination. Their humor became darker. Their songs became sadder. They were winning battles, but losing pieces of themselves with each victory. "War changes people," Lieutenant Lisa Grant told Zthar one evening, as they watched human forces prepare for another engagement. "But it changes humans differently than it changes other species. We don't break the same way others do." "How do humans break?" Zthar asked. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "We don't break. We just become more human. The scary kind of human that our own history books warn us about." That night, Zthar lay in his quarters listening to human voices singing in the corridors. The songs were about home, about people they loved, about places they would never see again. But underneath, the sadness was something that chilled his blood. After 6 weeks with human forces, Zthar began to notice changes that frightened him more than any devourer weapon. The humans were winning their war, but something was happening to them that he couldn't fully understand. Major Helen Brooks had survived the destruction of her outpost by pure chance. She had been off base during the final battle, leading a patrol that found the devourer approach route. Now she commanded a battalion of Marines, and Zthar watched her lead them into battle with something that could only be called fury. "Brooks, you've got 3 companies of bugs dug into that ridge," came the voice of Captain Morris over the radio. "Recommend we call for orbital bombardment." Helen's response was immediate. "Negative. My people can handle this." Zthar watched through his binoculars as Helen's battalion charged up the ridge directly into devourer defensive positions. They didn't use cover. They didn't try to flank the enemy. They simply ran straight at creatures designed to kill them and started shooting. What followed was not a battle. It was something closer to a brawl. When the Marines ran out of ammunition, they used their rifles as clubs. When their rifles broke, they used rocks, sticks, and pieces of dead devourers. When they ran out of weapons entirely, they used their hands and teeth. "This is insane," Zthar said to Lieutenant Grant, who was monitoring the communications. "No," Grant replied quietly. "This is what humans look like when they stop pretending to be civilized." By the end of the day, Helen's battalion had cleared the ridge. They had also lost 60% of their people. The survivors sat among the corpses of friends and enemies, many of them covered in blood that wasn't their own. When Zthar found Helen after the battle, she was sitting next to the body of one of her corporals. The young woman had been torn apart by devourer claws, but she was still smiling. She was telling jokes right up until the end, Helen said without looking up. Jokes about the bugs, jokes about dying, jokes about everything. Jenny always made people laugh. Zthar noticed that Helen's hands were shaking. Her eyes had a strange brightness that he had seen in other humans recently. Major Brooks, your people fought well today, Zthar said carefully. Helen finally looked at him. My people fought like animals today. The difference is that animals kill for food or territory. Humans kill because someone needs killing. The conversation was interrupted by Corporal Rick Hansen, one of Helen's squad leaders. Hansen had been with human forces since the beginning of their deployment. He walked up to them carrying the helmet of a dead Marine. Major, Tony's gone, Hansen said. His voice was flat and emotionless. Triggered a grenade when the bugs cornered him. Took 6 of them with him. Hansen was smiling as he said this. It was not a happy smile. Hansen, you should get some rest, Helen told him. Rest is for people who sleep, ma'am. I haven't slept since Tony died. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face when he pulled that pin. He looked happy about it. Hansen walked away, still carrying his friend's helmet. Zthar realized that the human was completely broken inside but still functioning as a soldier. In fact, he seemed to be functioning better than before. Major, your people are showing signs of severe psychological trauma, Zthar said. Helen nodded. 60% of human forces are clinically insane by alien standards. None of them have requested medical discharge. You know why? Why? Because crazy humans are still humans, and humans finish what they start. That evening, Zthar witnessed something that would change his understanding of human nature forever. He watched a ritual that humans called the naming. Before each battle, human forces gathered to recite the names of their dead comrades. All of them. Every single person who had died since the war began. The list took over an hour to complete and grew longer after every engagement. But instead of making the humans sad or afraid, this ritual seemed to make them angry. Furiously, dangerously angry. Angela Martinez, killed defending Supply Convoy 7, called out Sergeant Williams. Present, shouted the assembled troops. Bobby Chen, killed boarding Devourer cruiser in Sector 4. Present. Jennifer Lopez, killed holding position at Outpost 12. Present. The names went on and on. Hundreds of them. Each name was followed by the word present, as if the dead were still there, still part of the unit. When the naming was finished, the humans sang their anthem. Not the official coalition war song, but something older and more disturbing. It spoke of death and glory, of paying prices and collecting debts. What is the purpose of this ritual? Zthar asked Captain Murphy. Murphy's expression was grim. Every name on that list is someone who died fighting these bugs. Every name is a debt the devourers owe us. We collect on those debts with interest. Zthar began to understand that humans carried their dead with them into every battle. Not as a burden, but as fuel for their anger. The full scope of human fury became clear when Zthar met General Betty Walsh, the overall human commander. Walsh was 50 years old and had gray hair, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Zthar uncomfortable. Commander Zthar, she said when they met in her command bunker. I understand you've been studying our methods. Yes, General. I am trying to understand how your species achieves victory under impossible conditions. Walsh smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Would you like to know the secret? Humans learned warfare by fighting other humans. For thousands of years, we perfected the art of killing things that think like us, fight like us, and die like us. She gestured to a wall covered with historical images. Zthar saw scenes of human armies throughout their history. Humans with spears fighting other humans with spears. Humans with guns fighting other humans with guns. Humans with machines fighting other humans with machines. Every weapon we've used against the devourers, we invented to use against ourselves, Walsh continued. Every tactic, every strategy, every principle of warfare we know came from killing our own species. What we're doing to the bugs is actually restrained by human standards." "Restrained?" Zthar asked. "Commander, humans once built weapons that could destroy entire planets. We created diseases that would kill every living thing on a world. We developed tactics so terrible that we made rules against using them on each other." Walsh walked to a window that looked out over the human base. Soldiers were preparing for another battle, moving with mechanical efficiency. "The Devourers think they're fighting a war," she said quietly. "They don't understand that for humans this isn't war. This is pest control." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. Devourer forces had launched a massive attack against the human fleet. Every available ship was being called to defend the main supply lines. Zthar joined the battle aboard the flagship, watching as human forces responded to overwhelming odds with their usual mixture of tactical skill and controlled insanity. Admiral Susan Blake commanded the fleet from the bridge of the UES Constitution, a ship that had been rebuilt so many times it was more patched than original hull. "All ships, this is Blake," the Admiral announced. "We've got about 200 bug ships incoming. Our job is to make sure they regret this decision." The battle that followed was the largest engagement of the war so far. Devourer bioships swarmed toward human positions like a living wave of destruction. The humans met them head-on, trading ship for ship in exchanges that favored no one. But Zthar began to notice something strange. The Devourer forces were hesitating. Ships that should have pressed their attacks were hanging back. Formations that should have been coordinated were becoming scattered. "They're afraid," Captain Murphy said, reading Zthar's expression. "Look at their attack patterns. They're not fighting like Devourers anymore. They're fighting like something that doesn't want to die." Zthar studied the tactical displays and realized Murphy was right. The Devourers had been programmed to consume and destroy without regard for their own survival. But months of fighting humans had taught them that every attack came with a cost they might not be willing to pay. In the middle of the battle, Admiral Blake made a decision that epitomized everything Zthar had learned about human warfare. When her flagship was surrounded by Devourer forces and taking heavy damage, she ordered all remaining ships to ram the enemy formation. "All ships, this is Blake. We're going to show these bugs what humans mean when we say goodbye. Follow me." In 12 human ships, including the flagship, accelerated directly into the heart of the Devourer fleet. The collisions destroyed every human vessel, but the explosions took 47 Devourer ships with them. As Zthar watched the battle's aftermath from his escape pod, he finally understood what he had been witnessing. Humanity hadn't just joined the war against the Devourers. They had changed what war meant. They had turned their own willingness to die into a weapon more terrible than any technology. They had made their enemies afraid to fight them, not because they couldn't be beaten, but because beating them cost more than anyone wanted to pay. The Devourers were learning that there were worse things than death. There was fighting humans, who had decided that their enemy needed to lose more than they needed to win. The final revelation came when human intelligence discovered the location of the Devourer command nexus. It was a massive bioship the size of a small moon, hidden in the deepest part of the Nightmare sector. This creature served as the brain for all Devourer operations in 3-star systems. "We're going to kill it," Captain Morris told Zthar with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. Zthar studied the intelligence reports with growing horror. The command nexus was protected by over 300 Devourer ships and countless defensive bioweapons. It could regenerate damage faster than conventional weapons could inflict it. Previous coalition attempts to destroy similar targets had failed with the loss of entire fleets. "Captain Morris, this mission is impossible," Zthar said. "Your entire fleet would be destroyed before you could penetrate the outer defenses." Morris grinned. "Yeah, probably, but impossible just means expensive, and we've been saving up." The human plan was typically insane. They would use every ship they had left, along with all their remaining personnel, in a single massive assault. There would be no reserves, no fallback positions, no escape routes. Either they would destroy the command nexus, or they would all die trying. "This is not a military operation," Zthar protested. "This is mass suicide." "Commander," said General Walsh, Humans have been committing mass suicide for good causes for thousands of years. We call it sacrifice, and we're very good at it. Against his better judgment, Zthar joined the assault fleet aboard the UES Defiance. Captain Murphy had been promoted to admiral after the previous fleet commander died in the last battle. The ship itself had been rebuilt so many times that none of its original components remained. As the fleet prepared to depart, Zthar witnessed the final naming ceremony. The list of dead had grown so long that it took 3 hours to recite. When it was finished, the humans didn't sing their anthem. Instead, they stood in complete silence for 10 minutes. "What are they doing?" Zthar asked. "Saying goodbye," Murphy replied. "Not to each other, to themselves. Everyone in this fleet knows they're not coming back." The journey to the command nexus took 2 days. During that time, Zthar watched humans prepare for their final battle with a calmness that was more disturbing than any hysteria. They wrote letters they would never send, recorded messages for families they would never see again, and made jokes about dying that weren't really jokes. Private Sam Torres, who had lost his leg in a previous battle, spent his time teaching other soldiers how to make improvised explosives from ship components. He did this while humming children's songs. "Torres, why are you so calm about this?" Zthar asked. Torres looked up from the explosive device he was assembling. "Commander, I've been dead since the day I joined this war. We all have. The only question was whether our deaths would mean something. Tomorrow we get our answer." When they arrived at the command nexus, Zthar saw the largest devourer force ever assembled. The bioships formed defensive layers around their command, creature like antibodies protecting a vital organ. The space around them crawled with smaller creatures designed to intercept incoming attacks. "All ships, this is Murphy," came the Admiral's voice over the communication system. "Today we're going to show the galaxy what humans mean when we decide something needs to die. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. Make every shot count, because we only get one chance at this." The battle began with the humans doing something that violated every principle of naval warfare. Instead of approaching in formation, they scattered across a 1,000-kilometer front and attacked from all directions simultaneously. Zthar watched from the Defiance's bridge as human ships threw themselves at devourer defenses with absolutely no regard for their own survival. The destroyer UES Jackson rammed 3 bioships before exploding. The cruiser UES Philadelphia used its main guns to carve a path through enemy formations, continuing to fire even as devourer weapons tore it apart. "This is not a battle," Zthar said to Admiral Murphy. "This is a feeding frenzy." Murphy nodded grimly. "That's exactly what it is. We're feeding them our ships and our people, and they're choking on what we're giving them." As the battle progressed, Zthar began to understand the terrible logic of the human assault. Every ship that died took multiple enemy vessels with it. Every human who fell killed several devourers in the process. The exchange rate was unsustainable for both sides, but the humans didn't care about sustainability. Captain Jake Morris, who had survived the destruction of his ship, led a boarding party onto the command nexus itself. Zthar watched through helmet cameras as 50 humans fought their way through the interior of a creature designed to be the ultimate predator. The nexus fought back with every weapon evolution could devise: acid that could dissolve metal in seconds, toxic gases that caused immediate organ failure, creatures that existed only to kill intruders. The corridors themselves tried to crush the humans or digest them alive. The humans kept going. "Morris, you need to retreat," Zthar said over the radio. "Your team is taking massive casualties." "Can't retreat, Commander," Morris replied between bursts of weapons fire. "We're the only boarding party that made it this far. If we don't plant these charges, everyone else died for nothing." Zthar watched 27 humans fight their way to the heart of a creature the size of a city. They died one by one, consumed by horrors that had no names in any civilized language, but they kept advancing, leaving a trail of explosives in their wake. When Private Torres reached the Nexus's central nervous system, he was alone. The rest of his team was dead. His armor was breached, his weapons were destroyed, and he was breathing the creature's toxic atmosphere. He planted the final charge by hand. "This is Torres," he said over the radio. His voice was calm despite the fact that he was dying. Charges are set. 30 seconds to detonation. Tell my mom I kept my promise." "What promise?" Zthar asked. Torres laughed, but it turned into a cough that sprayed blood across his helmet visor. "I promised her I'd make the bad guys pay for starting this war. Looks like the bill just came due." The explosion that followed could be seen across 3 star systems. The command nexus died in convulsions that tore space itself, taking with it the central intelligence that coordinated Devourer operations across a quarter of the galaxy. Of the 300 human ships that began the assault, 17 survived. Of the 50,000 humans who participated in the battle, fewer than 2,000 lived to see its end. But the Devourer command structure in this sector was completely destroyed. As Zthar helped with rescue operations, he found Admiral Murphy floating in the wreckage of his ship. The human was barely alive, missing both legs and one arm, but he was smiling. "We did it," Murphy whispered. "We actually did it." "Admiral, you lost 95% of your forces," Zthar pointed out. Murphy's smile widened. "Yeah, but we killed 100% of theirs. That's what we call a good trade." In the days that followed, Zthar learned the true scope of what humans had accomplished. Without the command nexus, Devourer forces across 3 star systems became disorganized and vulnerable. Coalition fleets that had been retreating for months suddenly found themselves facing confused, frightened enemies. But the victory came with a price that horrified even Zthar. Humanity had sacrificed an entire generation of warriors to achieve it. The humans who survived were changed, marked by experiences that would haunt them forever. When Zthar finally returned to Forward Base Delta 7, he found General Krixtal and Admiral Fern waiting for his report. They wanted to know how humans had achieved the impossible. "How did they do it?" Krixtal asked. Zthar thought carefully before answering. "They didn't fight to win. They fought to ensure their enemy lost. They turned their own willingness to die into a weapon more powerful than any technology." "Are you saying humans are naturally suicidal?" Admiral Fern asked. "No," Zthar replied. "I'm saying humans are naturally willing to pay any price for something they believe in. They believe the Devourers need to die, so they're willing to die to make that happen." He paused, thinking about everything he had witnessed. "We created a weapon to fight monsters," he continued. "We discovered that the weapon was also a monster. The difference is that our monster chooses to fight for something other than itself." Krixtal's mandibles clicked nervously. "What do you recommend regarding future human operations?" Zthar looked out the observation deck at the distant stars where human survivors were still fighting impossible battles and winning them. "I recommend we give humanity everything they need to finish this war. I also recommend we never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to consider us enemies." He filed his final report that night. In it, he wrote, "Humanity has not joined our war. They have changed what war means. They have weaponized hope, sacrifice, and the simple belief that some things are worth dying for. The Devourers were designed to be the ultimate predator. They never encountered anything willing to pay the ultimate price just to hurt them." The last line of his report would be quoted in military academies for generations. "We asked humans to fight monsters. We should have asked if we were prepared for what they would become in the process." Years later, when the war was finally won, and the last Devourer ship was destroyed, Zthar would visit Earth.